I never thought I'd be the kind of person who clung to the past. But when my grandmother passed away 5 years ago and left me her house in Maplewood, New Jersey, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just a house. It was a time capsule of my childhood. Every creaky floorboard whispered stories of laughter-filled family dinners, late-night talks with my best friend on the porch, and summers spent chasing fireflies in the backyard. Now, at 28, it's where I feel most grounded, even as my freelance graphic design career keeps me glued to my laptop for hours on end. It's cozy, charmingly imperfect, and mine, or so I thought. But then there are my parents, Richard and Margaret Bennett, living their golden years in sunny Florida. They've always had this way of inserting themselves into every decision I make, no matter how small. "Clara," Mom would say during one of our weekly phone calls, her voice dripping with concern, "you're wasting your potential staying cooped up in that old place. Why don't you let us handle selling it? We know some great realtors." Dad would chime in too, his tone more gruff but equally insistent. "You could invest the money, start fresh somewhere else. That house is just holding you back." Holding me back? Sure, the plumbing occasionally acts like it's plotting against me, and the heating bill spikes enough to give me nightmares. But this house isn't a burden, it's home. Or at least, it was until everything changed. It all started with what seemed like an innocent phone call. Well, as innocent as any conversation with my mom can be. She called while I was elbow deep in a project deadline, which meant she caught me at my most distracted and probably crankiest. "Clara," she began, her tone sugary sweet, "we were thinking about that house of yours again." I sighed inwardly. "Here we go. Karen Miller, she's a realtor down here, says she has clients who jump at the chance to buy a property like yours. Just think of what you could do with that money." I gripped the edge of my desk, forcing myself to stay calm. "Mom, I already told you I'm not selling. Grandma left this house to me. It's not just some asset to liquidate." Her response came quickly, laced with frustration. "Oh, Clara, stop being so sentimental. You're young. You should be out exploring the world, not stuck in that old house full of memories. Let us help you move forward." Forward? Was she serious? To me, moving forward meant building a life here, creating new memories while honoring the ones that came before. But apparently to them, moving forward meant erasing everything that made this place special. A few days after that infuriating phone call, I found myself rummaging through the attic, looking for God knows what. Maybe inspiration for my next design project, or maybe just a distraction from the mounting tension between me and my parents. That's when I stumbled across the dusty shoebox tucked away in the corner. Inside was a collection of old letters, faded photographs, and wait, what was this? My fingers brushed against a stiff piece of paper. Pulling it out, I realized it was the original deed to the house, signed by Grandma herself. The handwriting was unmistakable, looping and elegant, just like her. And there it was, plain as day. The property was left solely to me, with no mention of my parents whatsoever. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I figured it was just a formality, so I tucked it away in my safe deposit box at the local bank and forgot about it. Looking back now, though, I can't help but wonder if Grandma knew something I didn't, if she somehow foresaw this exact situation and wanted to protect me from it. Whatever her reasons, that little piece of paper was about to become the most important thing I owned. One lazy Saturday afternoon, I was sipping coffee on the porch, scrolling through emails on my phone, when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Glancing up, I saw a sleek black sedan pulling into the driveway. Out stepped a woman in her mid-40s, dressed impeccably in a tailored blazer and heels. She carried a clipboard and wore a smile that was equal parts professional and unsettling. "Hi there," she chirped, striding toward me. "Are you Clara Bennett?" Something about her presence set off alarm bells in my head. "Yes," I replied cautiously, standing up. "Can I help you?" She extended a manicured hand. "I'm Karen Miller, with Sunshine Realty. Your parents hired me to list this property for sale." For a moment, I swear my heart stopped beating. "Excuse me," I managed to choke out. "My parents what?" Karen's smile faltered slightly. "They said they had authorization to proceed. Did they not discuss it with you?" I felt a wave of anger crash over me, hot and suffocating. No, they hadn't discussed it with me. They hadn't even bothered to ask. Instead, they'd gone behind my back, treating my home like a bargaining chip in one of their grand plans for my life. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my composure. "Look, Ms. Miller," I said firmly, "this house isn't for sale. Please leave." As she drove away, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that this was only the beginning of a fight I never asked for. By Monday morning, I was on a plane to Florida. There was no way I was letting this slide, not without answers. When I arrived at my parents' condo, Mom greeted me with a tight hug and an overly cheerful, "Clara, darling." What a surprise! Dad, sitting in his recliner watching golf, barely glanced up. "To what do we owe this visit?" he muttered. I dropped my bag on the floor and crossed my arms. "We need to talk. About the house." Dinner was tense, to say the least. Mom served roasted chicken and mashed potatoes, but neither of us touched our plates. "Why did you hire a realtor without telling me?" I demanded. Dad leaned back in his chair, frowning. "Because you weren't doing anything about it, Clara. That house is just sitting there, falling apart. We were trying to help." "Help? Was he kidding? Help? By selling something that doesn't belong to you? Did you honestly think I wouldn't find out?" Mom chimed in, her voice pleading. "Sweetheart, we only want what's best for you. You deserve better than that old house." "Better?" I stared at them, incredulous. How could they not see that this wasn't about the house at all? It was about control and trust. After the disastrous dinner with my parents, I couldn't sleep. The conversation replayed in my mind like a broken record, each word cutting deeper than the last. My chest felt tight, not just from anger but from betrayal. They didn't trust me to make my own decisions. That much was clear. But what stung even more was the realization that they saw me as someone who needed saving, someone incapable of figuring out her own life. I wasn't going to let them steamroll over me. Not this time. The next morning, I called Jessica Hall, an old college friend who now worked as a lawyer in New York City. Jess had always been the pragmatic one in our group, the kind of person who could dissect any problem with razor-sharp logic. "Clara," she said after I explained everything, her tone sharp and focused, "you need proof of ownership. Do you have the deed?" Suddenly, it hit me, the dusty document I'd found in the attic years ago. "I think so," I replied hesitantly. "It's in a safe deposit box at the bank." Jess didn't miss a beat. "Good. Get it. If your name is on that deed, then legally, the house is yours. Your parents can scream all they want, but they don't have a leg to stand on." Armed with the original deed and Jess's advice, I filed paperwork with the local courthouse to halt any further action on the sale of the house. It wasn't easy. There were forms upon forms, signatures required, and fees that made my wallet cry, but I gritted my teeth and pushed through. When the realtor, Karen Miller, showed up again a few days later, clipboard in hand, I handed her a copy of the cease and desist letter. Her perfectly polished smile faltered. "This changes nothing," she said stiffly before walking away. "Oh, but it did. It changed everything." Word spread quickly. My parents weren't happy. I could tell by the flurry of texts and voicemails they left, none of which I answered. Then came the guilt trip calls. "How could you do this to us, Clara?" Mom wailed during one particularly dramatic message. "We've only ever wanted what's best for you." Best for me? Or best for them? I deleted the recording without responding. Meanwhile, Dad took a different approach, his gruff voice laced with accusation. "You're being selfish, Clara. You're throwing away a chance to secure your future because of some sentimental attachment to a crumbling old house." Selfish? Maybe I was. But if standing up for myself meant being selfish, then so be it. Things escalated faster than I expected when a local reporter somehow caught wind of the story. One day, I opened my laptop to find an article titled, "Family Feud Over. Maplewood Home Sparks Debate." The piece painted me as either a stubborn idealist clinging to the past or a brave young woman fighting for her independence. It depended on who you asked. Neighbors began stopping by to offer unsolicited opinions. Mrs. Peterson from across the street gave me a sympathetic pat on the shoulder. "Your grandma would be proud of you, dear," she whispered conspiratorially. On the other hand, Mr. Alvarez down the block muttered something about kids these days and how I should just sell the damn house already. Social media exploded too. People I hadn't spoken to since high school suddenly reappeared in my inbox, weighing in on whether I was right or wrong. Some comments were supportive, but others, not so much. Why doesn't she just listen to her parents? One anonymous user wrote, "They obviously know better." Another chimed in with, "She's throwing away free money." What a waste. Each hateful message felt like a punch to the gut. Was I really doing the wrong thing here? For the first time, doubt crept in. Maybe I was being unreasonable. Maybe I was wasting an opportunity. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my parents decided to take their case public. A local news station aired a segment featuring them, sitting side by side on their floral-patterned couch in Florida, looking every bit the picture of concerned, loving parents. "We're heartbroken," Mom said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "All we've ever wanted is for Clara to thrive. This house, it's holding her back." Dad nodded solemnly. "She won't even talk to us. We're trying to help, but she refuses to listen." Their performance was Oscar-worthy and it worked. Comments flooded in, many siding with them. Friends started texting me, asking if I'd seen the interview. "Are you okay?" one asked gently. I wanted to scream, to tell everyone that they didn't understand, that this wasn't about helping, it was about control. But instead, I stayed silent, letting the storm rage around me. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the flickering light of a TV. For the first time, I wondered if I was strong enough to see this through. Thankfully, I wasn't completely alone. Jessica checked in daily, offering legal guidance and moral support. "Ignore the noise," she told me firmly during one phone call. "Focus on the facts. The deed is in your name. That's all that matters." Her confidence buoyed me, reminding me why I was fighting in the first place. Then there were my childhood friends, rallying around me like a protective shield. Sarah, my best friend since kindergarten, showed up unannounced one evening with a bottle of wine and a tub of ice cream. "Forget those trolls online," she declared, plopping onto the couch beside me. "Anyone who says you're wrong clearly doesn't know you or your grandma." Even neighbors I barely knew began showing their support. Mrs. Patel from 2 doors down baked me a tray of samosas, insisting I needed comfort food. Mr. Thompson, the retired mechanic, stopped by to fix the leaky faucet I'd been ignoring for weeks. "Can't have you dealing with nonsense like this on top of everything else," he said gruffly, though his eyes softened when he added, "Your grandma would be proud of you, kiddo." Slowly but surely, their kindness reminded me that I wasn't fighting just for myself. I was fighting for the people who believed in me and for the legacy Grandma had entrusted to me. As the court date drew nearer, the weight of everything pressed down on me like a lead blanket. Every morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach, dreading what lay ahead. Legal fees were piling up, and despite Jess's reassurances, I couldn't shake the fear that I might lose, not just the house, but also whatever fragile connection remained between me and my parents. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every argument we'd ever had. Would they ever forgive me for standing my ground? Did they even see this as betrayal, or were they too blinded by their own convictions to understand? One evening, while organizing papers for the case, I stumbled upon something unexpected, an old shoebox tucked away in the back of my closet. Inside were letters written by Grandma before she passed away. Most were addressed to friends or distant relatives, but one caught my eye. It was dated just months before her death, and the handwriting was shaky yet unmistakably hers. As I unfolded the brittle pages, my heart sank. She wrote about her strained relationship with my parents, how they rarely visited unless they needed something, and how she feared they'd try to take the house after she was gone. "Clara," she wrote near the end, "this home is your sanctuary. Protect it fiercely, no matter what anyone says." Tears blurred my vision as I read those words. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about honoring her wishes. But could I really use this letter in court? Doing so would expose decades of family pain and possibly destroy any chance of reconciliation. The night before the hearing, I sat on the porch, clutching Grandma's letter under the glow of the porch light. Fireflies danced lazily around the yard, casting flickering shadows against the siding of the house. 4 hours, I wrestled with the decision. Part of me wanted to bury the letter again, to keep this painful secret locked away where it belonged. But another part, the part that felt raw and exposed, knew I couldn't ignore it. If I didn't bring it up, my parents would continue to paint themselves as selfless saviors, twisting the narrative to suit their needs. And maybe, just maybe, Revealing the truth could force them to confront the damage they'd caused long before I came into the picture. When I finally went inside, I called Jess. "I found something," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "It's complicated, but it explains a lot." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Complicated how?" she asked cautiously. I hesitated, then told her everything: the strained relationship between Grandma and my parents, the resentment simmered beneath years of silence, and the heartbreaking plea in Grandma's final words. When I finished, Jess exhaled slowly. "This changes things," she admitted. "If we present this in court, it could undermine their credibility entirely. But are you ready for the fallout?" I didn't answer right away. How could I be ready for something like this? Still, I knew what I had to do. "Let's go with it," I said firmly. "No matter what happens, I need to honor her." The courtroom was smaller than I imagined, its sterile beige walls doing little to ease the tension crackling in the air. My parents sat across from me, flanked by their lawyer, a slick man named Mr. Peterson who wore an expensive suit and an insincere smile. He opened the proceedings with a polished speech about parental guidance and financial responsibility, portraying my refusal to sell as reckless and immature. "My clients have only ever acted out of love for their daughter," he concluded, gesturing dramatically toward Mom and Dad. They nodded solemnly, avoiding eye contact with me. When it was our turn, Jess rose confidently, her presence commanding respect. "Your Honor," she began, her tone calm but authoritative. "The facts are clear. The original deed explicitly states that ownership of the property belongs solely to Clara Bennett. Any claims otherwise are baseless." Then she paused, pulling out Grandma's letter. "Furthermore, we have evidence demonstrating that the late Eleanor Bennett intentionally excluded Richard and Margaret Bennett from inheriting the property due to long-standing familial grievances. This is not merely a dispute over real estate. It is a question of honoring the deceased's final wishes." The room fell silent as she handed the judge a copy of the letter. I glanced at my parents, whose faces had gone pale. Whatever defense they planned, it hadn't accounted for this. After presenting the documents, the judge called for testimonies. My parents went first, delivering rehearsed speeches about sacrifice and love. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her voice quivering as she spoke about all the times she'd supported me growing up. "We've given her everything," she said, looking directly at the judge. "And now she throws it back in our faces." Dad echoed her sentiments, his tone gruff but tinged with sadness. "All we want is for Clara to succeed. Why won't she let us help her?" When it was my turn, I stood slowly, my legs feeling like jelly. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "This house isn't just a building," I began, my voice soft but steady. "It's where I learned who I am, where I healed after tough times, where I kept my grandmother's memory alive. Selling it wouldn't be moving forward, it would be erasing pieces of myself." I paused, glancing briefly at my parents. I know they think they're helping, but sometimes help comes at a cost. In this case, it almost cost me my identity. By the time I sat down, tears were streaming down my face, but I felt lighter somehow, as if speaking my truth had lifted a burden I'd been carrying for far too long. The judge deliberated for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Based on the evidence presented," he began, his voice firm, "the property in question legally belongs to Miss Clara Bennett. The original deed is valid and binding, leaving no room for ambiguity. Therefore, the attempted sale initiated by Mr. and Mrs. Bennett is hereby nullified." Relief washed over me, followed quickly by exhaustion. We'd won, but at what cost? Before dismissing the case, the judge added, "However, I urge both parties to consider reconciliation. Families should strive to heal, not divide." His words hung heavily in the air as everyone filed out of the courtroom. Outside, reporters swarmed us, shouting questions and snapping photos. I ignored them, focusing instead on the hollow ache in my chest. Winning the legal battle didn't mean winning the war. My parents walked past me without a word, their expressions unreadable. For the first time, I wondered if the rift between us was truly unfixable. The days following the court ruling were a blur of mixed emotions. On paper, I'd won. I had legal validation that the house was mine, free and clear. But in reality, It felt like I'd lost something far more valuable, my family. My parents hadn't called or reached out since the hearing, and their silence spoke volumes. Every time my phone buzzed with a notification, my heart leapt, hoping it might be them, but it never was. Instead, I scrolled through social media, where strangers continued to dissect our family drama like it was some kind of soap opera. Some praised me for standing up for myself. Others accused me of being ungrateful. The constant noise left me feeling raw and exposed. One afternoon, while tidying up the living room, I found an old photo album tucked away on the bookshelf. Flipping through its pages, I was transported back to simpler times. Birthday parties, holiday dinners, lazy summer afternoons spent sprawled on this very floor playing board games. In one picture, Mom was laughing as she helped Grandma frost a cake, her face lit up with genuine joy. Another showed Dad teaching me how to ride a bike, his hands steadying the handlebars as I wobbled forward. Looking at those images, it was hard to reconcile the people in them with the distant, angry figures they'd become. Were they really so different now? Or had I just forgotten who they used to be? 2 weeks after the verdict, I couldn't take the silence anymore. I drove down to Florida, determined to force a conversation, even if it meant reopening old wounds. When I arrived at their condo, Mom answered the door, her expression guarded. "Clara," she said softly, stepping aside to let me in. Dad was sitting in his usual spot, pretending to watch TV, but clearly aware of my presence. The air was thick with tension, each second stretching longer than the last. Finally, I broke the silence. "We need to talk." At first, neither of them responded. Then Dad sighed heavily, muting the television. "What do you want us to say, Clara?" he asked, his voice tinged with resignation. "You made your choice. You chose the house over your own family." His words stung, but I refused to back down. "No, Dad, I didn't choose the house over you. I chose to stand up for myself, for once. Did you ever stop to think about how I felt? About why this place means so much to me?" Mom's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't interrupt. "Grandma left this house to me because she trusted me to protect it. And when you tried to sell it behind my back, it felt like you were betraying not just me, but her too." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mom whispered, "We didn't know about the letter." About how she felt. Her voice cracked, and suddenly, the walls they'd built around themselves began to crumble. Dad looked away, rubbing his temples. "We thought we were doing the right thing," he admitted gruffly. "But maybe we got carried away." That night, we stayed up late talking, really talking, for the first time in years. Mom confessed that she'd always struggled with guilt over not visiting Grandma more often, and selling the house had seemed like a way to make amends. "I thought if we sold it, we could use the money to give you a better life," she said, her voice trembling. "But I see now that I was wrong. This house isn't holding you back. It's part of who you are." Dad nodded reluctantly, adding, "And maybe we've been trying to live vicariously through you. Pushing you to move on, to succeed, it wasn't fair." Hearing them acknowledge their mistakes brought tears to my eyes, not out of anger but relief. For so long, I'd carried the weight of this conflict alone, convinced they'd never understand. Now, finally, it felt like we were on the same page again, or at least closer than we'd been in months. "I don't expect things to go back to normal overnight," I told them honestly, "but I want us to try, to rebuild what we lost." They both agreed, and though the road ahead wouldn't be easy, it was a start. Over the next few weeks, we worked slowly to mend the fractures in our relationship. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness and lingering resentment, but we were making progress. Mom started sending me care packages filled with homemade cookies and handwritten notes. Dad called occasionally to check in, his conversations less lecturing and more curious about my life. Even small gestures, like asking about my work or sharing memories of Grandma, helped bridge the gap between us. Meanwhile, I threw myself into renovating the house, using it as a way to channel my emotions. I painted the kitchen cabinets a soft sage green, replaced the leaky faucet Mr. Thompson had fixed properly this time, and turned the attic into a cozy reading nook. Each improvement felt like a step toward healing, not just for me, but for the house itself. One day, Sarah came over to help me hang new curtains in the living room. "This place looks amazing," she said, surveying the changes. "It's like it's breathing again." She wasn't wrong. With every brushstroke and hammer strike, the house and my spirit felt renewed. As the renovations progressed, I invited neighbors to stop by and see the transformation. Mrs. Patel brought over another batch of samosas, marveling at the freshly painted walls. "You've done such a beautiful job," she said warmly. "Your grandmother would be so proud." Those words meant more to me than she probably realized. By the time spring rolled around, the backyard was blooming with flowers I'd planted in memory of Grandma. Daisies, her favorite, alongside vibrant marigolds and lavender. The porch swing creaked gently in the breeze, a reminder of lazy summer evenings spent watching fireflies. Working on the house gave me a sense of purpose, but it also reminded me of why I'd fought so hard to keep it. It wasn't just four walls and a roof. It was a sanctuary, a repository of love and memories. And now, thanks to the effort I'd poured into it, it felt alive again. One evening, as I sat on the porch sipping tea, I realized something important. The fight hadn't just saved the house. It had saved me, standing up for what I believed and had taught me to value my independence, my voice, and my choices. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. To celebrate the completion of the renovations, I threw a small housewarming party, inviting neighbors, friends, and even a few extended family members who had supported me throughout the ordeal. The backyard was strung with fairy lights, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Someone brought a guitar, and soon we were singing old favorites under the stars. Laughter echoed across the lawn, mingling with the scent of grilled burgers and fresh-cut grass. Toward the end of the night, I stood up to thank everyone for coming. "This house has been through a lot lately," I said, raising my glass. "But it's stronger now because of all of you, because of the love and support you've shown me. So here's to new beginnings and to honoring the past." Cheers erupted, and for the first time in ages, I felt completely at peace. This wasn't just my home anymore. It was a testament to resilience, community, and the power of standing up for what matters most. In the quiet days that followed the party, I took stock of everything that had happened. The legal battle, the emotional turmoil, the slow process of rebuilding trust with my parents. It had all changed me in ways I couldn't have anticipated. I was stronger now, more confident in my ability to navigate life's challenges. But I was also softer, more willing to forgive and seek understanding. Losing the connection with my parents had taught me just how precious it was, and I wasn't about to let it slip away again. One morning, as I watered the flowers in the backyard, I noticed a firefly hovering near the garden. Smiling, I watched it dance in the sunlight before disappearing into the trees. It reminded me of Grandma, of the countless nights we'd spent chasing these tiny lights together. In that moment, I realized something profound. Homes aren't defined by their walls or roofs. They're defined by the people who fill them with love. Whether it was Grandma's memory, my parents' eventual apology, or the friends and neighbors who rallied around me, this house was brimming with love. And that, more than anything, made it worth fighting for. By Thanksgiving, things between me and my parents had improved significantly. They called one evening in late October, inviting me to spend the holiday with them in Florida. "We'd like to cook dinner this year," Mom said hesitantly, as if she expected me to say no. I agreed without hesitation, knowing how much it meant to all of us. When I arrived at their condo, the table was set with Grandma's china, a gesture that brought tears to my eyes. Over turkey and stuffing, we laughed and shared stories, careful not to dwell on the past but instead focus on the present. It wasn't perfect. We still tiptoed around certain topics, but it was a start. For the first time in months, I felt like part of a family again. After dinner, Dad pulled out an old photo album he'd been working on. "I thought you might want these," he said gruffly, sliding it across the table toward me. Inside were pictures of Grandma, some I'd never seen before. Her standing proudly in front of the house when it was newly built, her baking cookies in the kitchen, her holding me as a baby. "She loved that house," Dad admitted quietly. "And she loved you even more." His words caught me off guard, and for a moment I couldn't speak. Instead, I hugged him tightly, grateful for this fragile yet hopeful connection we were rebuilding. Back home in Maplewood, I decided to create a memory wall in the living room, a tribute to Grandma and everything she'd given me. I framed the photos Dad had shared, along with Grandma's letter and other mementos, her favorite recipe card, a pressed daisy from her garden, even a keychain she'd always carried. Each item told a story, a piece of her legacy stitched into the fabric of the house. As I arranged them on the wall, I realized how much of her spirit still lingered here, not just in the physical space, but in the values she'd instilled in me: resilience, independence, and above all, love. The memory wall became a conversation starter whenever friends or neighbors visited. "This is incredible," Sarah said during one such visit, tracing the edge of a framed photo with her finger. "It's like your grandma's still here, watching over you." I smiled, feeling a pang of bittersweet nostalgia. "In a way, she is," I replied. Creating this tribute hadn't just honored Grandma, it had reminded me of the importance of preserving memories, of cherishing the people who shape our lives. The house wasn't just mine anymore, it was ours, a shared legacy spanning generations. On a crisp December morning, I woke up early to watch the sunrise from the porch. Wrapped in a blanket, mug of coffee in hand, I let the quiet stillness wash over me. The house looked different now, not because of the renovations, but because of everything it represented. It was no longer a battleground or a symbol of conflict. It was a place of healing, growth, and renewal. Every creaky floorboard, every chipped paint stroke told a story, and I was finally ready to write the next chapter. As the sun rose higher, casting golden light across the yard, I thought about all I'd learned over the past year. Standing up for myself had been terrifying, but it had also been empowering. Forgiving my parents hadn't erased the pain, but it had opened the door to reconciliation. And honoring Grandma's memory had taught me that homes aren't defined by their structures. They're defined by the love and stories within them. For the first time in a long time, I felt content. Not because everything was perfect, but because I knew I'd fought for what mattered most, and emerged stronger for it. As I sat there, watching the world wake up around me, I whispered a silent thank you to Grandma. "You were right," I said softly. "This house is my sanctuary, and I'll protect it fiercely for you, for me, and for everyone who calls it home." Looking back, I realized the fight over the house wasn't really about ownership. It was about identity, trust, and the complex bonds that tie families together. Losing the house would have meant losing a part of myself, but winning didn't come without cost. The experience forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about my relationships, my fears, and my own capacity for forgiveness. In the end, it wasn't the legal victory or the renovated walls that mattered most. It was the journey itself and the lessons I carried forward. I learned that standing up for yourself doesn't mean pushing others away. It means finding your voice and using it wisely. I learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing to move forward despite the scars. And I learned that homes, real homes, are built not from bricks and mortar, but from love, memories, and the people who fill them with meaning. As I stepped inside to start another day, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the house, for my family, and for the resilience that had carried me through. Life is messy, complicated, and unpredictable, but sometimes, in the midst of chaos, we find exactly what we need to grow. And for me, that growth began with a little house in Maplewood, one I'll cherish forever.